This is a short video presentation showing the events of 2344 Long Bent Air Cadets GoldDofE expedition, as well as the history we discovered within the Cheviot Hills, exploring our GoldDofE aim. Around 12,000 years ago, the last glaciers of the most recent ice age melted away. The ice sheets were replaced by a tundra landscape of lichens and mosses and were roamed by herds of reindeer. Scrub gradually colonised the land, which was eventually followed by larger trees such as pine and oak, which cloaked all but the most inhospitable rocky screes and mountain tops with dense wild wood. Where reindeer once roamed, red deer, roe deer, and wild cattle now grazed. Salmon, trout, and other fish were plentiful in the rivers.
Hunter-gatherers. People moved into the valley around 10,000 years ago and lived in temporary huts made from skins stretched over wooden poles. Seasonally, they moved around the landscape catching fish and game and gathering nuts and berries. Later, they created clearings where grazing animals would gather, making hunting easier. Very little traces were left by these people, as most of what they used consisted of wood, bone or hide, which has long since rotted away. Only a few flint tools and weapons survived as evidence to their existence. Living in an untamed world, home to wolves, bears and lynx, these people probably had a belief system based on the natural world, and mountains, crags, rivers and springs may have featured in ancestral myths.
Around 6,000 years ago, at the beginning of the Stone Age, things began to change as people took up farming land. Polished stone axes were used to fell areas of land and cereals were grown, such as oats, wheat and barley. Hunting was still important, but people began to keep domesticated animals too, such as sheep, cattle and pigs. Tombs and temples were built of places of worship, and later large circles known as hedges were built out of the great giant rocks that had mysterious symbols on them. We do not know the exact meaning of these now.
The area of our expedition, the Cheviots, is rich with history in its culture and past events. Although most of what left behind and what we were able to see the remnants of were battles, and the structures made because of them, such as the forts, the footprint left behind by other cultures still exists to this day. About 4,000 years ago, during the Bronze Age, the climate was warmer than today, and this allowed people to live high in the hilltops. Small villages of thatched timber roundhouses were built across the landscape. The people of this time built walls to form fields in which to farm and keep livestock. Even to this day, the effects of the farming on the land can be seen in how it has formed parts of the landscape, as we spotted on parts of our expedition. The interesting thing about these people and their culture is how they would bury the bodies of their dead. We know little about the ceremonies that may have taken place alongside this. However, they would bury the bodies in stone coffins and cover the burial spot with a pile of stones called a cairn. These were the cairn builders, and these cairns left behind give evidence of the burials to us today.
Time of the hill forts. During the Iron Age, the landscape became more open with fewer trees and lower valley floors became prone to flooding. Control over land for pasture and cultivation became important. People began to enclose settlements with fencing, known as palisade, and later dry stone walls. Although known as hill forts, they were just farmsteads that belonged to extended families, and defined territories can be seen attached to the settlement. Cultivation remains and can be seen in the form of cord rig where cereals were grown. The walls around the hill forts reflected the status of the family living there. Often sections were more elaborate than others and appeared stronger and more impressive than they actually were as a defence mechanism.
Romans reached the Cheviots in AD 79. By this point in time, local communities were living in a peaceful collection of farmsteads. Much of the natural wildwood had been cleared, and hillsides would have been largely treeless. Some hill forts were still occupied, but most had fallen to nature. In AD 122, the Romans began constructing Hadrian's Wall between the River Tyne and Solway. This was many miles south of the area's valley, and for most of the Roman occupation, Bremish Valley lay outside the empire. The lack of Roman camps in the area suggests natives were left to get on with their lives as before. It is also possible they traded cattle and cereals in return for protection from the tribes to the north. The find of a Roman coin at the native settlement at Forward Dean suggests a basic level of contact with their imperial neighbours.
The light and the dark. In the early 7th century, the Kingdom of Northumbria was founded and Christianity was introduced. Gradually, people abandoned their sacred places and their old gods. They moved from hilltops to small lower-lying villages of timber houses and Christian churches. War broke out between England and Scotland in AD 1296. Climate worsened and a series of poor harvests brought famine. Black Death ravaged the lands, killing many. Border reavers descended on villages without warning. Defenceless victims would lose everything they had, not even the church would be spared. Peace came when James Stuart, King of Scots, became King of England in 1603 and society returned to normal.
The walls around the summit of Borello are made from dry stone and designed to be strong, as well as look good. At the roundhouse, the walls are made from large timbers. A fire in the centre of the home provides heat. The smoke can escape through the thatched roof. Firewood is gathered sometimes from distances far away. The job is never ending. Cattle are kept and used for heavy jobs like ploughing. They are also used for meat and their hides. Hunting provides extra meat. Horses are kept as a symbol of status and used for travel because they're fast and can cover long distances quickly. Sheep are also kept for meat and wool. Normal daily life involved fetching water, growing food, and gathering fuel. The work was hard, but the people were used to it. During the last century, things have changed as inventions such as new machinery, piped water supply, and central heating, to name a few, have made the old way of living a thing of the past.
While doing our gold expedition, we passed through an area called Edwardy Shank. We found this area to be rich with history through physical maps, and we also found at Edwardy Shank, as well as historical boards which detailed why this area was famous. It turns out Edwardy Shank was the start of a famous path called the Salter's Path. The path has connections back to the 11th century, where it connected Rotherbury and Owenhelm, and also passed through Ingram, three, at the time, large villages. The path was thought to have been used by salt traders in the medieval period when hundreds of salt operations began. The salt was transported to Newcastle, where it was shipped abroad to areas with a deficit of salt. This is said to be one of the first bits of business the North did in large scale for financial benefits. The full path takes around 5.5 hours to complete and is classed as a strenuous walk, with some high inclines and boggy areas.